They said some dogs fail because they're stubborn, but the truth is, some dogs fail because they hear what others can't. And on that cold morning at the training grounds just outside Coronado, where the air smelled of salt and sun-warmed asphalt, Rex stood motionless while the other K9s snapped to commands like machines, his handler's voice cutting through the field again and again, sharp, impatient. But Rex didn't move, his ears twitching slightly, his amber eyes fixed not on the target dummy, 50 yards ahead, but somewhere beyond it, somewhere deeper, as if the ground itself was whispering, and the instructors exchanged looks, the kind that didn't need words, the kind that ended careers early, because this was the 5th failed drill in a row, and in a place where precision meant everything. Hesitation looked like weakness, and weakness didn't stay long. A clipboard snapped shut, a decision already forming. But Rex didn't look confused, didn't look scared, he looked certain, like he was waiting, not disobeying, just waiting, his breathing slow, steady, controlled in a way that didn't match the chaos of shouted orders around him. And when the whistle blew to reset the drill, he didn't flinch like the others, didn't glance back at his handler for approval. He simply shifted his weight slightly, one paw pressing harder into the packed dirt, as if testing something beneath the surface. And for a brief moment, so brief no one noticed, the wind dropped, the distant hum of helicopters faded, and there was only silence, the kind of silence that sits heavy in your chest. And Rex tilted his head just a fraction, like he had caught a rhythm no human ear could follow, a pattern too subtle, too precise. And somewhere across the field, a man who hadn't spoken once since arriving finally looked up, his gaze locking onto the dog with a quiet intensity, as if he recognized something everyone else had missed. And in that stillness, before a single word was said, before anyone understood what was about to change, the truth had already begun to surface, not in commands or corrections, but in the quiet space between what was seen and what was finally about to be understood. The man who had been watching stepped forward without a word, his boots pressing softly against the gravel as the rest of the training field carried on in noise and motion. But around him there seemed to be a different kind of stillness, the kind that did not interrupt, but quietly replaced everything else. And when he reached the edge of the drill line, no one stopped him, not because of rank or recognition, but because something in the way he moved suggested he did not need permission. And Rex noticed him immediately, not with excitement or fear, but with a subtle shift, a tightening of focus, as if the signal he had been waiting for had finally arrived. And the man crouched just slightly, not enough to command, not enough to threaten, just enough to meet the dog at eye level, his expression unreadable, calm in a way that did not ask for control, only understanding. And for a moment neither of them moved, the world continuing behind them in blurred noise, handlers calling commands, leashes tightening, boots scraping against the ground. But here there was only a quiet exchange that no one else could hear. And then the man reached into his pocket and pulled out nothing more than a small metal whistle, worn at the edges, catching a thin line of sunlight. And he did not raise his voice, did not give instruction. He simply let out a single, low note, soft enough that most of the field did not even register it. But Rex did, his ears snapping forward, his entire body aligning in an instant, not like obedience, but like recognition, like something long buried had just been unlocked. And without waiting for permission from anyone else, the man stepped aside, not as a gesture of authority, but as an invitation, and Rex moved, not in hesitation this time, but with purpose, his stride steady, direct, crossing the open ground in a line that made no sense to the instructors watching from the sidelines, because there was nothing marked there, no target, no scent, no reason. And yet the dog continued, nose low, breathing controlled, as if following something invisible but undeniable, and halfway across the field, he stopped, one paw pressing firmly into the earth again, the same way he had before, but this time there was no doubt in him, only certainty, and he let out a single, sharp bark that cut through the air and silenced everything else. And for the first time that morning, the instructors were not speaking, not correcting, not judging. They were watching, because whatever this dog had been doing all along, it was no longer something they could dismiss. And the man behind him, still standing where he had stepped aside, did not look surprised, he only watched. Quietly, as if he had seen this moment long before it happened, as if he understood that some signals were never meant to be heard by everyone, only by those who knew how to listen. The handlers stood still for a moment, their hands still tight on their leashes, eyes fixed on the dog, now standing proudly at the edge of the field, his ears forward and his breathing steady. Rex had found something, not in the way that dogs found things, by chance or instinct, but with purpose, as if he had known exactly where to go the entire time. The man, Ethan Cole, was still watching, his gaze not on the dog, but on the ground just beyond him, where Rex's paw had pressed deep into the earth, and then a soft rumble rolled through the air, almost imperceptible, like the earth was shifting under their feet. Ethan's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. The silence stretched as Rex stayed frozen, staring at the same spot on the ground, his tail stiff, his body still. The instructors had begun to walk toward the dog, their footsteps quiet against the gravel, but they were unsure, hesitant, as if they couldn't quite understand what had just happened. Ethan, however, didn't move, not even a glance toward them. He knew that Rex wasn't looking for attention, not looking for praise. The dog was looking for something else. As the instructors approached, one of them spoke, his voice low, but the uncertainty clear. Is it a mistake? Is this just a random reaction? But before Ethan could answer, Rex moved again, his nose pressing harder into the dirt, the sharp bark piercing the still air. The instructors froze. It was not a bark of failure, not a bark of distress. It was a bark of discovery. Ethan nodded slowly, stepping forward now, his eyes locking onto the dog, as if they shared an unspoken understanding, a silent agreement. He's not failing, Ethan said quietly, his voice steady, the weight of it hanging in the air. He's just waiting for someone to listen. He's been trying to show us this for a while. And as if to prove Ethan's words, the ground beneath Rex shifted once more, and a small object surfaced, half buried in the soil. It wasn't much, just a simple piece of metal, rusted and old, but to those who had been paying attention, it was everything. The instructors gathered around, their confusion giving way to understanding, their faces slowly transforming from doubt to awe. Ethan stepped aside again, allowing Rex to step forward. He wasn't a failure. He had never been a failure, and neither had Ethan. They had simply been waiting for the right moment, the right signal, the moment when the silence would reveal the truth. Rex turned to Ethan, his eyes bright, the faintest wag of his tail as if to say, "I knew you would understand." And in that moment, it wasn't just a dog and his handler. It was something more, something that couldn't be explained by drills or commands or expectations. It was a bond forged in understanding, a bond that went deeper than words, deeper than actions. And as the instructors stood silently, finally realizing what had just occurred, they understood one thing above all else. Rex wasn't just a K9. He was something more. And with Ethan at his side, he was exactly where he needed to be. The morning light was fading, casting long shadows over the training field. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the gravel, watching the small group of handlers begin to gather around Rex, who was still standing near the patch of earth where the metal object had surfaced. The instructors were murmuring amongst themselves, their voices low, unsure of how to process what had just happened. Ethan felt a calm settle over him, the same calm that had kept him focused throughout his career, whether on a mission or in a moment like this. He didn't need to explain Rex's actions. The dog had spoken for itself, and yet, he knew the instructors would need answers, as they always did. What exactly happened? One of them asked, his voice tinged with confusion. Ethan didn't turn to look at him immediately. Instead, he kept his gaze on Rex, who was now sitting calmly, his tail swishing lazily behind him as if nothing had ever been wrong. He was waiting for the signal. Ethan said softly, his voice steady. Not just from me, but from the field, from the silence, from everything around him. The handler who had spoken before furrowed his brow. Waiting for what? Ethan turned then, his eyes meeting the handler's with quiet certainty. For someone to listen, for someone to understand that not every reaction is a failure. Sometimes, it's just a pause, a moment of waiting for the right time. The instructor seemed to absorb this, though his confusion didn't fully disappear. Ethan glanced at the small piece of metal that Rex had uncovered. It wasn't much, just a rusted fragment of what seemed like an old tool or a forgotten piece of machinery, but to Ethan, it was a symbol of something much bigger. Rex had been trying to tell them something for days, maybe even longer, but they had all been too focused on the drills, the steps, the motions that followed the same routine. It wasn't until Ethan stepped aside, until he stopped demanding and started listening, that Rex had finally acted. The dog had known all along. He's not just a dog, Ethan continued, his voice soft but firm. He's part of the team. He's been trained to find things, to notice things, and to protect. But sometimes, it's not about what you find. It's about when you find it, and why it matters. The other handlers looked at each other, some nodding, some still unsure of how to process it. Ethan turned his attention back to Rex, who was now looking up at him, his eyes steady, waiting. The bond between them was silent but undeniable. Ethan stepped forward, his hand reaching out to rest on Rex's head, and the dog leaned into the touch, his body relaxed, his tail still swaying. "We're not here to just follow orders," Ethan said quietly. "We're here to listen, to trust, and to act when the time is right." Rex's tail wagged once, just a little more than before, as if agreeing. And in that simple moment, amidst the quiet hum of the field and the shifting of the instructors behind him, Ethan knew that something had changed. Not just in Rex, but in all of them. Rex had proven that sometimes success doesn't come from doing what you're told. It comes from understanding when to listen, when to wait, and when to take action. The silence had spoken louder than any command ever could. The days that followed felt different. The hum of the training field, the rush of drills and commands, was still there, but it was quieter now. The instructors moved with more purpose, their eyes catching the smallest of details, and the air around them seemed to hold a new weight, as if they had all come to understand something deeper than what had been taught in their manuals. Ethan stood in the background, his arms crossed, watching Rex. The dog had become something more than just a canine to him. He had become a symbol, a reminder that not every lesson was found through success or failure, but through patience and understanding. The handlers had begun to watch Rex closely, no longer assuming that his pauses were just signs of failure. They waited, just as Ethan had taught them to, observing, listening. Each time Rex took a step forward now, there was a quiet respect in the way they stood, no longer rushing to correct him, no longer doubting. Rex didn't need them to push him anymore. He had found his rhythm. And slowly, as the days turned into weeks, the once dismissed K9 began to rise above the expectations placed on him. One afternoon, the group was out in the field again, the drills starting to take on a different rhythm, when Rex paused in his tracks. This time, it wasn't a hesitation. It was deliberate. His nose twitched, his eyes narrowing, and he turned his head slightly, his body stiffening, as if he had caught something just beyond the visible horizon. The instructors watched, waiting. The air seemed to freeze, every movement on the field suspended, as if everyone had been trained to act, but now they had learned to wait. Rex moved again, slowly, deliberately, his paws pressing into the dirt as he made his way toward a cluster of trees on the far side of the field. The instructors followed his movements, their eyes sharp, unsure of what they would find. And as Rex neared the trees, he stopped. This time, his nose was down, his body low, and he began to dig, his paws working the earth with focused precision. The ground shifted beneath his movements, and suddenly, a faint glint of metal caught the sunlight, partially buried under the roots of an old oak. Ethan stood still, watching from the sidelines, as Rex continued, his paws scraping at the earth, uncovering what had been hidden for years. The instructors moved forward, slowly, unsure of what to make of it. They knelt beside Rex, their hands reaching into the dirt to pull out a rusted, forgotten object. It wasn't much, just a small metal box, but to them, it was everything. It was the moment that sealed the truth. Rex hadn't been failing all along. He had been waiting. He had been listening to the ground beneath him, to the world around him, to the rhythm of the silence. Ethan walked forward now, his gaze never leaving the dog. He knew it was there. Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with quiet pride. He wasn't just trained to find. He was trained to understand when to wait, when to listen. And as the instructors stood, hands still gripping the small metal box, they understood, in that moment, what Rex had known all along. It wasn't about rushing to the finish line. It was about being ready to listen, to act when the time was right, and to trust that the right signal would come. Rex had taught them all that lesson, and in return, they would never see failure the same way again. The next few days felt like a turning point for everyone at the training field. The instructors began to approach their work with a new perspective, one that valued patience as much as precision. Ethan Cole kept his distance, observing from the sidelines, as Rex continued to show his abilities in ways no one had expected. The dog wasn't just following commands now. He was responding to the environment, to the subtle cues that had once been overlooked. Rex's behavior had proven that understanding was more important than simply executing a task. One afternoon, the handlers gathered for a new drill, one designed to test the K9S in a series of complex search and rescue scenarios. The instructions were clear: find the missing object, retrieve it, and bring it back. The air was thick with tension as the dogs were released, each one sprinting off in different directions, noses to the ground, bodies moving like well-oiled machines. Rex, however, didn't move immediately. He sat down at the edge of the field, his head turning slowly, his ears flicking as he took in the sounds and smells around him. Ethan stood watching from a distance, his arms crossed. The other handlers and instructors had started to exchange uncertain glances, waiting for Rex to do something. But Ethan knew better. He waited. And then, after what felt like an eternity of stillness, Rex stood, his eyes narrowing as he focused on a distant section of the field. Without a single command, he began to move, his steps slow but purposeful, as if he was following a map only he could see. The handlers exchanged looks. They were unsure of what was happening. But Ethan's gaze never left the dog. Rex wasn't rushing. He wasn't reacting out of urgency. He was taking his time, studying the terrain, listening to the silence around him, trusting his instincts. He moved with the calmness of someone who knew exactly where he was going. As Rex approached a cluster of trees near the edge of the field, he paused again, his nose twitching, and with a swift motion, he dug into the soil beneath the roots. The others watched in silence, the tension rising as Rex worked tirelessly, his paws scraping at the earth with precision. And then, just as it had happened before, the metal glint of something old and forgotten appeared, half buried in the dirt. The instructors moved forward cautiously, their curiosity piqued, but it was clear this time that they weren't questioning Rex's actions. They were waiting to see what he would do next. As Rex gently unearthed the object, one of the instructors spoke quietly, almost to himself. How did he know it was here? Ethan didn't need to answer. He had already understood. Rex wasn't failing. He wasn't waiting for the right moment to obey. He was following a deeper understanding, one that no one had noticed before. Rex had proven that what appeared to be hesitation was in fact an act of awareness, of listening, of waiting for the right signal. And in that moment, as the dog uncovered yet another hidden object, the lesson was clear to everyone. Sometimes, the most important actions aren't the ones that come first, but the ones that follow after the silence. Rex wasn't just a K9. He was teaching them all how to listen, how to trust the pause, and how to act with purpose when the time was right. And as the drill ended, the instructors stood in awe, realizing that what they had witnessed was more than just a successful search. It was a reminder that not everything needed to be rushed. Sometimes, success came from understanding the quiet moments and trusting that the right time would come. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere at the training facility shifted. The usual routine was still there, but something had changed in the air, in the way the instructors approached the drills and the way the dogs responded. There was a quiet understanding now that had not existed before. Rex had shown them all what it meant to trust, to wait, and to listen. No longer were the handlers so eager to correct, to rush in with commands. They had learned to observe, to let the dogs find their own way, to follow their instincts without pushing them too hard. One afternoon, Ethan sat at the edge of the field, watching Rex as he worked with a new handler. The young man, nervous but determined, had been struggling with his dog's responses. His K9 had been inconsistent in the drills, sometimes responding well, sometimes not. Ethan could see the tension in the handler's shoulders, the way his grip tightened on the leash every time the dog hesitated. Rex, on the other hand, moved calmly beside him, his eyes steady, his tail moving in slow, rhythmic swings. Ethan smiled to himself. He had seen this before. The young handler was pushing the dog too hard, trying to make him perform, to do what he expected, without considering what the dog needed. Ethan stood and walked over slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel. The handler didn't notice him approach until Ethan was right beside him. "Let him breathe," Ethan said softly, not looking directly at the young man, but instead watching the dog. "He doesn't need to be rushed. He'll find it when he's ready." The handler looked up, a mix of frustration and confusion in his eyes. "But we're on a time schedule. We need results now." Ethan nodded, understanding the pressure. "I get that. But Rex doesn't work on a schedule. And neither should you. Let him find his rhythm, and the results will follow." For a moment, the handler just stood there, still gripping the leash too tightly. But then, slowly, his posture softened. He glanced at Rex, who was sitting calmly, his gaze focused on the distance, as if waiting for something to happen. The handler exhaled slowly, and with a deep breath, he relaxed his grip. Rex immediately stood and took a few steps forward, moving with purpose, his nose twitching as he followed an invisible path. The handler watched, his eyes widening slightly. Rex didn't rush. He didn't act out of instinct or command. He moved with confidence, each step deliberate, as though he knew exactly where he was going. The handler took a step back, letting Rex lead the way, trusting him for the first time. Slowly, Rex moved toward a section of the field, his body tense but controlled. He stopped, and then, with a single movement, he dropped his nose to the ground and began to dig. The handler took a few steps closer, watching in awe as Rex unearthed another hidden object, a small, metal canister that had been buried under the soil. Ethan stood a few feet away, watching quietly. The handler looked up at him, a smile creeping onto his face. "He found it," the young man said, his voice filled with disbelief. Ethan nodded, his smile slow and knowing. "He always does. He just needs someone who's willing to listen." The handler knelt beside Rex, gently rubbing the dog's ears as he unearthed the object. "Thank you, boy," he whispered, and Rex turned to him, his tail wagging softly. It wasn't just the success of the drill that mattered. It was the realization that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come not from pushing harder, but from taking a step back, allowing trust to grow, and understanding that things will unfold when the time is right. Ethan watched the young handler with Rex, a sense of quiet pride welling up inside him. The dog had taught them all how to listen, to trust, and to wait for the right moment. And now, the handler was learning, just as Ethan had, that not everything needed to be forced. Rex had shown them that the path to success was not always straight, but it was always worth following. The days stretched into weeks, and with each passing moment, the bond between Rex and his handler grew stronger, the trust deepening with each drill, each silent pause, each moment when the world seemed to hold its breath. Rex had transformed before their eyes, not into the perfect machine they had expected, but into something far more valuable, a partner who understood timing, who listened to the unspoken signals that the others missed. The trainers and handlers who had once doubted him now saw his quiet strength for what it truly was. They began to trust him, to understand that sometimes the most important lesson was not how quickly a dog could perform, but how patiently it could wait for the right moment. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Ethan sat on the edge of the field, watching Rex as the dog moved through the drills with ease. The other handlers were still a little unsure, still pushing their dogs to meet expectations, but Ethan knew that the real transformation had already occurred. It wasn't just the physical drills, the jumps, the tracks, or the fetches. It was the way Rex now responded, not because he was ordered to, but because he had learned to trust his instincts, to read the rhythm of the field, to feel the energy shift before anyone else did. It was that connection that made Rex different. And it was that connection that had changed Ethan, too. As he watched the others call out to their dogs, trying to make them move faster, follow their every command, Ethan's eyes drifted back to Rex, who was standing still, his head slightly tilted as he watched the others with calm curiosity. The dog didn't rush. He didn't push. He simply waited, taking in the world around him, until the moment was right. Ethan knew what that moment would be before anyone else did. And then, as if to prove the point, Rex suddenly moved, his legs steady as he made his way to a corner of the field, his body in perfect sync with the earth beneath him, as if he could feel the vibrations of something hidden deep below. The other handlers watched, their gazes following Rex's every move, unsure of what they were seeing. Rex stopped near an old shed, his nose pressed to the ground as he circled the area, sniffing the dirt, his paws moving with purpose. Ethan stood up slowly, his heart beating a little faster, knowing exactly what was happening. Rex wasn't just working on instinct anymore. He was leading the way, reading the subtle clues in the air, the scent on the wind, the pressure of the earth beneath him. As the dog dug, his movements were measured, controlled, his body steady, his mind focused. And then, as if on cue, Rex unearthed another object, this time a small piece of equipment buried just beneath the surface. The handlers stood in silence, their jaws slack with amazement. It wasn't just a successful drill. It was a reminder of what Rex had been trying to teach them all along, that sometimes the best way to succeed wasn't by following the rules, but by understanding when to break them, when to trust, and when to listen. Ethan walked over to Rex, who was sitting proudly beside the uncovered object, his tail wagging in the cool breeze. The other handlers slowly approached, still unsure of what to make of it all, but one thing was certain now. They were seeing Rex in a new light. They were seeing him not just as a dog who had passed the test, but as a partner who had taught them how to slow down, how to listen, and how to trust the process. As Ethan knelt beside Rex, he couldn't help but smile. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice filled with pride. And in that moment, it wasn't just Rex who had proven something. It was all of them. They had learned to trust the silence, to embrace the pause, and to understand that true success comes not from rushing, but from knowing when to wait, when to act, and when to listen to what the world around them was trying to say. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity, each day a reflection of the quiet transformation that had taken place within the team. Ethan noticed it in the way the handlers approached their work, in the subtle shift in their attitudes toward their dogs. No longer were they focused solely on following instructions, rushing to complete drills. Now they waited. They observed. They learned. Rex had shown them that there was more to success than speed and precision. There was a quiet strength in waiting, in understanding the subtle signals of the world around them. The days became a mix of observation and learning, the handlers trying their best to replicate the patience that Ethan had shown, the trust that Rex had earned. One morning, as the sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the field, Ethan watched from the sidelines as a new drill began. The goal was simple: track a hidden object and retrieve it. But this time, it was different. This time, Rex wasn't working alone. He had a new handler, someone fresh to the team, someone still learning how to see beyond the surface. Ethan could tell right away that the new handler was trying to rush, trying to force the dog to perform, to retrieve the object in record time. But Rex wasn't moving. His gaze was steady, his body still, his ears flicking slightly as he took in the world around him. The handler tugged at the leash, urging Rex to move, but the dog remained unfazed, his focus on something else. Ethan took a few steps forward, his boots crunching softly against the ground. He could feel the tension in the air, the same way he had when he first started working with Rex. The new handler's frustration was palpable, his impatience growing with each passing second. But Ethan knew this was part of the lesson. He walked up to the handler, his voice calm. "Let him go at his own pace," he said softly. The handler glanced at Ethan, confusion in his eyes. "But we have to finish the drill. Rushing won't get you there faster," Ethan replied. "Trust him. Let him listen to the field, to the silence. He'll find the path when it's right." The handler hesitated. For a moment, but then, as if sensing the truth in Ethan's words, he relaxed his grip on the leash. And just like that, Rex moved. It wasn't a rush. It wasn't a sprint. It was a slow, deliberate step forward, as if the dog was following an invisible path that only he could see. The new handler watched, his eyes widening in realization, as Rex moved with purpose, each step measured, each movement intentional. The dog was no longer responding to commands alone. He was responding to the world around him, to the subtle changes in the environment, to the rhythm of the earth beneath his paws. Rex moved to the far side of the field, his nose low, his body in perfect sync with the ground. He paused, his ears twitching, and then, without hesitation, he began to dig, his paws working the soil with precision. The handler stood still, watching in awe as Rex unearthed a hidden object, the metal glinting faintly in the sunlight. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, and then the handler bent down, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for the object. He looked up at Ethan, his face filled with a mixture of surprise and understanding. He knew it was there, the handler said, his voice filled with wonder. Ethan nodded, a small smile on his face. He always does. Sometimes, it's not about how fast you go. It's about trusting that the path will appear when you're ready to see it. As the handler stood there, holding the object, Rex turned to look at him, his eyes steady, his tail swaying gently. The bond between them had deepened, and the handler understood now. It wasn't just about following the drill. It was about listening, waiting, and trusting the process. And as Rex sat calmly at his side, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet pride. The lesson was complete, not just for the handler, but for everyone. The field was no longer just a place for drills. It was a place for understanding. And Rex, in his quiet way, had shown them all how to truly listen.